Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Daily Friend Show. I'm your host, Nicholas Lorimer, and today I'm joined by Mr. Marius Roodt. Marius, how are you?
How's it, Nick? How's it going?
Yeah, it's going all right. It's going all right. And of course, we also have Mr. Gabriel Crouse. Gabriel, how are you, sir?
Leka, very good. How's it, Marius? How's it, Nick?
How's it?
So we, it feels like we're just about to start awkward small talk at the bars. But
next round's on me, but first round, someone else get
it. So we started off today in the pre-show chat, just kind of talking about some of the news stories and things. And you know what? Honestly, South Africa right now is a bit dull. I was not captivated by anything, and neither were my colleagues here. So instead, we're going to do, something a little bit special, of course. We're going to be talking about international things because there are many interesting things going on around the world. And of course, the one that's on everyone's minds right now is the Russian recognition of the two breakaway republics in eastern Ukraine. I think they're called the Donetsk People's Republic and the Luhansk People's Republic. I'm not 100% sure what the official names are. But anyway, these groups...
Donetsk and Lugansk. Ukrainian has a funny GH, which is like, it's an H that you've got to like breathe heavily when you say it, like.
Yeah, I basically can't pronounce any language that isn't like, you know, any name that wasn't from sort of west of Westminster. So I mean, I'm not surprised I'm not able to pronounce it. But anyway, yeah. So these entities have existed de facto for a while, and Russia has been pretty close to them. They've been described by the Ukrainians as Russian puppet states, by the Americans as Russian puppet states. And as Gabriel said, I think a while ago on the Daily Friend Show, or it might have been on one of our other podcasts, the Russian State Duma, at the behest of the Russian Communist Party, we voted to ask Putin to recognize these republics as independent countries. They formed in the aftermath of the Euromaidan protest, revolution, coup, whatever you want to call it. And they have been the site of conflict between the Ukrainian military and the Russian-backed separatists for a while now. So what does it mean that they've been recognized? Well, I'll ask Gabriel that question just now, but it's all the move was condemned by the UK, the US, Russia, a lot of the European countries, Turkey,
not Russia,
Japan. Obviously not Russia. Turkey, a lot of the European countries, the UK, France, the US, and China, being ever helpful, said something along the lines of it asked all parties to exercise restraint. Anyway, so I guess the thing that sticks out to me about the recognition of these republics is that the Russian government may enter into formal agreements with these parties, which might include something like building permanent military bases in eastern Ukraine, which I think would be the most significant development. Gabriel, let's start with you. You're a very passionate devotee of that part of the world. What do you make of this? Are we going to see a big war between Ukraine and Russia?
I'm not sure I'm a devotee of that part of the world. The question on war, I'll answer. But first, let me say, I think the most significant development coming out of this will be that the People's Republic of Donetsk and of Luhansk or Lugansk, those people will finally get to vote. And I think the difference between what I'm emphasizing and what Nicholas is emphasizing is sort of the difference between how almost all English media will look at this and how it gets looked at, as far as I can tell, from inside of Russia. Marius, am I right in saying that we seem to have lost Nicholas?
Yeah, he seems to be frozen, but I'm sure he'll join us.
He'll join us presently. So the reason I say that, there is something extraordinary about the democratic asymmetries involved here, and that's not necessarily good news for democracy. When I was a high school debater, Nicholas and I were at the same high school and at different times in the same high school debating team. One of the common sort of high school debating points is democracies are better than other forms of government because democracies don't vote to go to war. This is an instance where that is challenged. Most Russians do not want to go to war with Ukraine. According to the Washington Post, which has done a lot of polling together with Levada, which is basically the IRR of Russia, the most credible independent think tank that commissions surveys, they have found that support for invasion is about 8%. Huge opposition to that. So most Russians don't want to do it. Putin and Lavrov, his foreign minister, have often explained why it is against their geopolitical interests to do it. And by the way, Ukrainian leaders like, what's her name, Yulia Tymoshenko, Poroshenko, Petro Poroshenko as well, have both said that the terrible thing is that Russia is calling for the Minsk II agreements to be adhered to. Those are agreements signed on to by effectively the Russians, the Europeans, and the Ukrainians, and in part some parts of the rebels or the separatists in Donetsk and Luhansk. And the reason the Ukrainians said these agreements are terrible and Putin is just trying to push this is because if those agreements had been followed through, then Donetsk and Luhansk would stay inside of Ukraine and would achieve some kind of Montreal-style, Scotland-style, be inside the country but have a special dispensation relationship, which would effectively allow them from inside of the country to make sure that Ukraine never joins NATO. And so Ukraine would effectively be turned into a buffer state.
It also goes a bit beyond that, which is that they would be able to exercise sort of foreign treaties and stuff. So they would have, in a sense, a kind of foreign policy of their own. So they would be sort of half in Ukraine, half not. It was a very unique, I think, agreement.
I think not all that different to Scotland, but anyway, the backstop is the following in terms of NATO. As long as Ukraine does not recognize Crimea, or as long as Kiev says that Crimea is part of Ukraine, Ukraine cannot join NATO. You can't join NATO if you're currently occupied. And
right, because
they
that
say that
it would immediately trigger a war,
Article
right?
5.
Because if any NATO country is under attack, all the other countries have to join.
So Ukraine says Crimea is part of Ukraine. America, all the countries, Nicholas listed as the sort of, I suppose, the moral angels of our world. The Europeans,
not
Washington.
Turkey.
No, Turkey's not part of this. I think Turkey has a different position on Crimea, but all of those other countries say that Crimea is part of Ukraine and it's been illegally invaded by Russia. The Russians say that's absurd. There was a coup in 2014. It's undisputed, really, that there was a coup in 2014, and that rendered Kiev's government illegitimate. And thereafter, Crimeans took an opportunity to vote. They voted to join Russia at an 85% rate or something like that. People worried that the vote might not have been free and fair, but subsequent polling by Levada, the Washington Post, and so on, as well as subsequent votes in Russian national elections, have shown that people in Crimea really are overwhelmingly happy to be in Russia, did not want to be in the Ukraine, which is a poorer country than South Africa and more badly run, etc. So Ukraine would have to win its membership in NATO. It would have to surrender its claim on Crimea. This is sort of the last thing holding back NATO from getting onto Putin's doorstep, on that part of his doorstep, which is something he really doesn't want. But I guess it's a bit of a trade-off. So the the interesting good news is that the people in the Donbass, Luhansk and Donetsk, who haven't been allowed to vote since 2014, will finally get a chance to vote. For people who care about democracy, that should matter. But I'm not sure that democracy always really matters to that part of the world. So maybe the most important thing is that there'll be increased military bases. Now, all of this goes out the window, of course. If there's an invasion from Ukraine into the Donbass, they don't recognize these countries. They have a lot of backers. The sort of American-backed militias or neo-Nazi armies or whatever you want to call them.
Well, hold on. Let's calm down here. We are neo-Nazi armies here, Gabriel.
The Azov, the Skions of the Azov Brotherhood.
There are some militias, but I think most of them have been dismantled now.
They've been incorporated into Ukraine's sort of domestic police force. Who knows if that'd be used to invade the independent republic, so-called, or to retake parts of Ukraine? I'm not sure, but whoever they are, if there is an invasion backed by British and American military units, in terms of hardware, not in terms of people, and German helmets that were donated, I think that could trigger
yes.
an invasion of Kiev.
It amuses me that the Germans only are sending helmets.
It's a funny signal they're trying to send, maybe. Anyway, the point is, I think one should worry about Kiev recklessly trying to invade these places. One should also worry about a further invasion from Russia, although it still strikes me and my credibility will be shot in terms of my ability to interpret things. If Russian troops do invade westwards,
right. And
the reason that they would do that, if it does happen, would be, I suppose, to secure the water lines going to Crimea, which have been turned off in a sort of borderline crime against humanity by Kiev's government for a long time. Nevertheless, I don't think that would justify an invasion, and I think it would be very harmful to Russia's geostrategic interests. Most Russians think it would be a terrible idea, and I think Putin would be punished at the polls if he went ahead with it. Although, of course, the problem is that the second biggest party in Russia, his main competition, are communist irredentists who really do want to recreate the borders of the Soviet Union and have been quite successful in using the sort of NATO's refusal to recognize Russia as a democracy, for example, or refusal to recognize the referendum in Crimea, to use that to say, look, those guys don't treat us as humans, so we might as well just treat them like enemies. And that's why I'm sort of pushing.
There's some reason to think that Russia might very well have, shall we say, further designs on Ukraine. Putin gave a speech.
The list. Yes.
Yeah. Putin gave a speech kind of laying this out and sort of saying, this is rubbish. We've had enough of this situation. And then he kind of gave this fairly ominous chunk of his speech, which was something along the lines of, look, Ukraine is this product of communist construction during the formation of the Soviet Union, and Ukrainians say they want to decommunize. So the implication being that full decommunization meant the destruction of Ukraine in some way, or its reincorporation into as some kind of constituent piece of Russia.
Yeah, war talk for sure. Not good.
Right, which is very not great. Look, for my money, I don't think that this is necessarily going to expand much more. I think that what we're seeing here is actually very similar to what happened in Georgia, where the two breakaway separatist republics, Abkhazia and South Ossetia, were recognized by Russia and occupied by Russian troops. And then the conflict sort of just froze in place there, with neither side able to dislodge the other. Marius, what do you make of all this?
I think there's a lot of stuff. It's a very complex situation, and I think Yeah, I mean, I think this has been building up for a while. We know that Vladimir Putin invaded, or Crimea became part of Russia 8 years ago. So this isn't a new thing. But what's quite interesting, I think, there's in terms of international relations, there've already been a couple of interesting countries that have come out and condemned what's happening in Russia. So Kenya, who's currently a member of the UN Security Council, has condemned the Russian decision to recognize these two republics in eastern Ukraine, and they released a statement today, I think, and they have it was quite a strong statement, and Kenya says we must complete our recovery from the embers of dead empires in a way that does not plunge us back to new forms of domination and oppression. And I think that's quite a powerful statement, and I believe Gabon's also come out and condemned the Russians. So I think, normally you don't want to generalize, but African countries would normally be on the side of the people who are opposing the West, and it seems like we're not seeing it this time. I think South Africa's most probably going to come out in support of the Russians, but yeah, I mean, that's probably a done deal, most probably. But yeah, I think there's just some interesting things happening there. But geez, I mean, nobody wants to see a shooting war here, but if if troops are going into a sovereign state and taking over, it's obviously not great and might embolden somebody like Putin. But yeah, I don't know nearly as much as the two of you. So, but yeah, like I said, I don't think everybody wants to see a shooting war, and nobody wants to see any loss of life. But you also can't let people just march into other countries and take over territory and so on.
But I know that some of my friends who are, or not friends, but acquaintances, some people I know, some fairly young guys who live in the UK, they are terrified that World War III is about to break out. But I think it's pretty fair to say that World War III is not about to break out, even if there is a much bigger conflict in Ukraine and Russia. That's definitely worth saying. This is a big deal, but it's not. We're not going to be living in Mad Max in 10 years from now, at least. Probably not. I can't see all ends. Anyway, okay. We've gone long on this. Let's move on to our next one, and this is about the British, or the English specifically. So the government in England is on Thursday going to be lifting all restrictions on COVID, or COVID restrictions, and they've unveiled what they call a living with COVID plan. This is being pushed for by Prime Minister Boris Johnson's government, and has been criticized by the opposition as moving out of the pandemic too fast. So, Gabriel, when I first described this, I said, this is a country that's going to be the first in the world or something to lift pretty much all its COVID restrictions. And you pointed out that this was not the first time that England had done this. Do you want to explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I think it was like 13 or 17 August last year. They had Freedom Day, where they lifted de facto all COVID regulations. And that was followed a couple of weeks later by Denmark. What was exceptional about the UK's case, not only was it the first outside of Sweden, outside of countries in the Far East, the first sort of majority white person country, which is unfortunately where people seem to rest their focus in the Anglosphere. Not only was it first, but it did it in the face of an increasing case wave. So cases really were climbing up very dramatically, and they just still opened up. And the reason they did it is, I guess, a trust in science. So the English public health system had done a very good job of tracking how many people had been vaccinated, as well as how many people had been infected and recovered. And they found that the sort of what I call the antivirus that had been downloaded into people's bodies to beat the virus in one of those two ways, that antivirus level was extremely high. And that gave them the confidence to say that even though there will be lots and lots of cases, and their caseload was sort of like 2/3 of the South Africans' highest wave peak for months and months on end, even though they had very, very high cases, their deaths stayed at about 2 per million per day, which puts it at a level of priority that is superseded by various other causes of death. So, terrible and tragic for people who die, but not the biggest issue in terms of what's killing people, and not something to justify a return to lockdown. That then changes with the emergence of the Omicron variant, worries about what that's going to do to these numbers, especially what that's going to do to vaccinated people who aren't as protected. So they lock up again. And they do have a bit of a grisly winter. Not as grisly, for example, as places like Denmark or the US, but they are moving out first. They've moved out both in a sort of case and death wave sense, and they're moving out politically. Now, I think part of what's interesting about this is that from a South African perspective, almost no one paid attention to the sort of Freedom Day move that they made towards the end for most of last year, or most of the second half of last year. We did. It's part of the reason that I think that I had a fairly good grip on what to expect in the wave to come. But I think part of what's interesting about it is the way that British partisan politics affects the way British people think about this. I was hanging out with someone who, very wealthy British, doesn't like Brexit, hates Boris Johnson for having had a party in the White House. I mean, in the number 10 Downing Street. And so really is like, it's a really terrible thing that it's all opening up, but then also says, no, but it's a really great thing that it's also opening up. Like, very relieved. Like, so there's this, like, I really want it to all open up, but like, it does seem, it is sort of right wing to open things up, to say that it's up to you. Left wing is like, government will tell you what to do. Right wing is like, scary, like maybe you'll die because government's not going to tell you what to do. In that sense of the divide, which I think does capture a lot of the difference between the Tory party and the Labour Party. It's like a right-wing thing, but that a lot of left-wingers seem to like. That notwithstanding, The Economist last year did a poll which found that 20% of Brits would like restrictions to stay in place forever, regardless of COVID, and that's curfews. Over 20%, something like 30%, wanted nightclubs to have to shut down at midnight forever, and there were various other very serious restrictions that people said that they were keen on forever, regardless of COVID. Like, COVID has taught us a lesson. It's great if you kind of shut down society a little bit, control it, stop people from nightclubbing and whatever. And I can see the appeal. It's sometimes kind of irritating when people are making a noise next to you when you're trying to sleep. But I think that group is going to be frustrated by it. I think that the fact that the UK is going into a summer rather than a winter bodes well for it. And economically, I guess if it does well, the Tory party might recover some grace, or Boris Johnson might. But if it doesn't do extremely well out of this, if it stumbles back into a lockdown, if there is another bad wave, then I think it's tickets not only for Johnson, it might be tickets for the Tories, because of this time how brazen the sort of opening up is, not just in its effect, which is the same as last time as far as I can tell, but in its messaging. So the messaging seems to be different. The messaging this time seems to be, if you still want us to be shut down, you're a dummy. Whereas last time the messaging was more like, we're opening up, trust the science. This time, of course, there's like, we encourage people to stay home if they've got COVID, but there seems to be a more harsh angle to it from the publications I'm reading. And I think they'll be punished if it doesn't turn out the way that they are planning it to.
So Marius, firstly, your thoughts on whether this is, politically speaking, going to be a good bet for them, and whether other countries are going to be following suit, do you think?
I think it all depends on how it turns out. Like Gabriel says, if suddenly there's another big wave and, the government's hands forced and they have to go back into another lockdown, might not look so good. But I think it's the right way to approach it. You need to treat people as like adults. If you're feeling sick, stay at home. If you want to keep wearing a mask, wear a mask. A friend of mine, she moved out to the UK in November last year, and she's out here now for a couple of weeks. And she told me hardly anybody's wearing masks on the tube and so on, which I think is fine. Each person needs to make their own decision. She still wears a mask, but that's her personal decision to do so. And I think that's how it should be. But I think we'll probably start seeing, we're going to have to move to a point where, pretty much people have to make their own decisions over their health, which is how we generally used to handle things in the past until, we decided to lock down basically the entire world. In South Africa, we basically got rid of, all restrictions. And I think it was very telling that the curfew was lifted on the 30th of December, whatever it was last year, because I think the government knew, if there's a curfew on New Year's Eve, people, that they stayed at home 2 years in a row now and didn't go jolling. I'm sure some people did, but I think a lot of people, they're just lockdown fatigue. And we've seen in the numbers, still case numbers can still be pretty high, but we've seen in the number of deaths and so on, because of a combination of vaccinations and prior infection, and people and doctors and so on knowing how to treat COVID now compared to the beginning of this pandemic in 2020. It's you're much less likely to get really sick and so on now if you catch COVID. And so I think this is where we're going to go. The British are leading the way on this, I think, but I think this has always been kind of the aim with Boris Johnson. He was never keen really on lockdowns, but I think public pressure, I think in Britain and around a lot of the world, people were pretty keen on lockdowns in the beginning, and Johnson's hand was forced to a degree, I think. But also what was interesting is that Scotland, which is governed by the SNP, which is Nicholas's favourite political party, who, kind of centre-left, they've said that they're going to...
That's sarcasm, just to be clear.
They're going to keep their restrictions, and they don't agree with what the British government is doing. So we'll see what happens there.
Right. So that's actually going to be one of, I think, the really interesting parts of this, is because England and Scotland are going to be under different rules, and so we're going to have like two very close to
like last year.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we'll have
the
two experiments next to each other. The English with not enforcing any rules, and the Scottish will be a bit different. Now, I'm not too sure what the Scottish rules are. They're not going to lockdowns or anything like that, but I think it's wearing masks, being forced to isolate when you're ill and so on.
Well, I can tell you that the pub owners in Northern England are probably going to be very happy at this news.
Yeah, I think if one other thing to just notice is that the UK did quite serious studies about outdoor stadiums and how that affects whether they are super spreader locales in about April last year, before it opened up its stadia and allowed people to go watch soccer matches and so on. And part of the reason they allowed people to go and watch soccer matches and so on was the results of those studies. The studies the results were mixed. They were slightly underpowered. Part of what they did is sort of track carbon dioxide concentrations, which gave the fairly obvious result that if you're going to a stadium, the real danger zone is sort of the unventilated, stand next to each other toilet, where the men all crowd at halftime. So there are concerns, but generally speaking, the fact that in the UK and various other parts of the world, sports stadia have managed to open up, I think is a difficult one for the Command Council in South Africa and the state of disaster chaps to deal with, because it's something that's very public. It's something that we confront on our televisions. Ordinary South Africans, a lot of poor South Africans have opinions about Man U or Chelsea. They're getting the sense that people are being able to go and watch soccer matches in stadiums, not so and that this is not causing major death. That's kind of makes it harder for stadium regulations to stay in place here in South Africa, which they currently are. We have asked the president through our attorneys last week for any evidence that keeping stadiums closed in South Africa is containing the pandemic. We are still waiting for an answer.
Yes, I suspect one may be waiting a while. And of course, one of the things about South Africa is that we're sort of, our government is so keen to, on one hand, end the state of disaster, but on the other hand, make it permanent, which is just, madness. Anyway, look, with a minute left, we managed to somehow slot South Africa back into our episode here. So I don't think we have time for our third story here. Gabriel, maybe do you just want to tell us about the campaign, where people can support it if they're interested in supporting the campaign that the IRR is running to end the state of disaster and the unnecessary regulation?
Oh, right. So end the state of disaster, irr.org.za. If you go there, you'll also see our latest campaign that we've just launched, which is to oppose the Basic Education Amendment Bill. Basically, that would allow the government to lump schools together, change some of the administration, change the language policy, change the admissions policy. It would also allow governments to whittle down whatever freedom there is in homeschooling it's a lot of centralization. I find Yes Minister is a British show, since we've been talking about that, which has good arguments for centralizing education. The problem is we're in South Africa, and everything Satu's ever touched has sort of turned into a quagmire. That's a polite word for how to describe our terrible matric results, especially if you look at the dropout rate. What we push instead, so we're not just trying to block this bill and use your signatures to get our standing to get in the way of this legislation, which is really harmful and illiberal, but also to push the better idea, which is vouchers for children, vouchers for parents, coming from the fiscus. So, the government is still helping education because they're good third-party effects. But instead of the government collecting the money and spending the money, does the first thing well, does the second thing badly. It collects the money and then gives a voucher to parents to figure out where to spend the money. And we think parents are much better placed to put their kids in schools that are kind of building skills rather than breaking kids' respect for authority down and inculcating really nasty revolutionary kind of values. Okay, that's a good campaign. Check it out. At irr.org.za. We really value your support. I know that a lot of Daily Friend listeners know about the IRR, but maybe haven't activated that sort of like sign on to a petition vibe. It's really valuable, and we've had some good wins last year, and we're planning to have some really big wins this year too.
You muted, Nick.